Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are, what time you are listening to this or watching this. My name is Winston, and this is the Revenue Alignment Podcast, where we educate marketers on how to prove their value at a C-suite level. Today, we have an amazing guest. I'm so happy he agreed to jump on with us, Cassidy Shield. Cassidy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Winston. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Definitely. So before we even begin, Cassidy, let me just enlighten the people on who you are, just so they understand the value they are going to get today. So you started out studying engineering, and based on what I'm seeing, you first started out as a senior consultant at PwC, then manager of a supply chain consultant. In terms of that was your role. Then you moved to VP of marketing at Alcatel, and later was managing partner at Bell Labs. And then you held 3 other VP of marketing positions after that. And now you are the senior VP of marketing and sales at Narrative Science, which I guess based on my estimation, in the simplest terms, you take data and make it understandable for everyone to understand through storytelling.
That's well said, Winston. That's exactly what we do. And I kind of sum up my career in kind of 3 phases. As you mentioned, the first phase was in supply chain and operations. That's where my heart and passion lied, when I came out of undergraduate studies. Second part of my career was actually in product management and kind of engineering. I ran a couple different software businesses inside Lucent Technologies. And then the third, which brings us to this conversation, is I became a marketer at some point in that journey, which is what I've been doing for the last, 10 or 12 years. And now I'm also leading the sales team.
Sure. Elaborate a bit more about that, because when I was looking through, just as you said, those 3 different phases, I'm like, wait, so he started out as an engineer, then project. I'm like, wait, how did he get into marketing? So that's a story I would love to explore. Like, how exactly did you get into marketing?
Yeah, I would say I was kind of pulled into marketing begrudgingly. And what I mean by that is I'm in this big company, and I've been running a couple software businesses. Think of them as like kind of startups or small acquisitions we made in a big company.
Right.
The first one was a team I was running out of Spain, and then I went to run a team out of Israel, and I was having a lot of fun. And I was part of a bigger software division, and I was one of the little products in that division. And like what you do in a big company, you go through a lot of reorganizations. And my boss became somebody who I consider a mentor at that time and still today. And he came to me and he said, "Listen, would you like to keep doing what you're doing and running this small software division, or would you like to run marketing for the entire division?" And I said, I would like to keep running software for a small.
I was not expecting that response. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't expecting that response. I was expecting you to be like, yeah, give me that new marketing role.
No, I was like, I don't want to go into marketing. I have no desire. But, the more I talked to him, and, he had the talent team involved, and, he convinced me, like, why don't you give this a shot? And so my first and I agreed. And my first marketing job, if you think about it, was I was running marketing for a software division. I was about $500 million in revenue at the time, and I had about 30 people on my team. So I went from never doing marketing to that. And I would say, to be honest, it probably took me 5 years to really come to terms with the fact that I'm a marketer. And what I mean by that is, there'd be oftentimes I'd have conversations with him as like, when am I going to go back to I want to go back to being a GM. I want to go back to running a product line or a division. And we talk, and there are many times through this journey where that almost happened, but it didn't. And I ended up staying in marketing. And, over time I realized, well, maybe I'm okay at this. And kind of learn to accept it and like it. And obviously now at this point, I enjoy it.
Well, I was about to ask you, how do you feel about it now? But you just said that, you've gotten to like it over the years.
Yeah, I've gotten to like it over the years. And I've also kind of realized what I like and don't like about marketing. And, I've got more comfortable with the type of role I'd be looking for in marketing, kind of the impact it can have on the company. And the alternative is I also understand what I don't want to do in marketing. Because, a lot of companies and listeners out there, marketing plays different roles in different organizations. And so, depending on the role and the opportunity, I might be more interested in it versus not so interested in it. So I've kind of figured out like what I want to at least stake my claim as far as like what my marketing team would be responsible for in a given organization.
Have you figured that out as yet?
Yeah, I think we've had the opportunity to really do that at Narrative Science. It's kind of what I think the emphasis of your show is. And that is, I want to run marketing teams that are, impacting the business, driving demand, driving revenue, positioning the company in unique ways in the market, really having kind of what I would consider outside business impact for the function in an organization. That's what, and the reason for that is like I've always been fairly close to like the driver of a business in any company, meaning when I was in product and software engineering, you're tied into kind of the front lines of working with customers. Even when you're doing supply chain work, it was usually with organizations that were dependent on the supply chain running very efficiently and delivering products and great service to end customers. And so it's just not my DNA to be in a marketing team that's more of a back office function. It needs to be a function that's out kind of driving the market and demand. That's what gets me excited. And not everybody has the opportunity to do that, or not every industry or every company set up in that way. And so, but from my perspective, that's what I look for in terms of opportunity. That's what we've been able to do at this company. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, great. And with that said, I'm going to make a very hard right. So get ready. So there's this trend on LinkedIn around CEOs don't get marketing, or never work for a CEO that doesn't get marketing. Of course, I have my opinions on it, but I want you to share yours because I don't want to influence any sort of bias on my part. So just give me your thoughts around that particular statement.
Yeah, I like this topic. I do. So I've said this before, and I've said this on LinkedIn. Like, there are probably some CEOs that don't get marketing, and if you're in that situation and you can't change the CEO's mind, then you should just leave the company.
All right.
However, I think by and large, marketers use this as an excuse. Meaning, I actually haven't ran into a CEO ever that doesn't understand marketing.
Right.
Now, they may think, their understanding of marketing or their marketing team is not that effective, and therefore it's not a high priority. So I put it more on the onus of the marketing organization or the marketing leader to make sure that the CEO understands, one, the importance of the marketing, and two, what does it mean for the business and how and the impact it's going to have. And so net, my perspective on this is marketers use this as an excuse. There's actually very few CEOs out there who don't understand marketing. It's upon the marketing leader to make sure the marketing organization is relevant at that company and in the eyes of leadership, in particular the CEO.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you 100%. Because, I've spoken to numerous marketers. I want to say numerous, I'm talking in the hundreds over the last 3 to 4 years. And, whenever I hear, one of the questions I always ask is, how do you tie your marketing activities to business outcomes? Like, what exactly are you hoping to achieve with your marketing? And I usually get answers like, website traffic, visibility, reach, brand awareness. Want to build a community, want to build a podcast. And I say, all right, that sounds well and great. But how is that tied to business outcomes exactly? It's like, we can build our brand with that. And I'm like, I don't think you can go to your CEO and say, hey, we want a 1 million or 10 million a year budget because we want to build brand. Like the first question he's going to ask or she's going to ask is how exactly is that impacting revenue? Right. And just as you said, I find that, how can I put this politely? A lot of marketers are very stuck in their way of operating, of thinking that, well, this is marketing, this is how it is, this is how it should be. Me, you shouldn't even ask me any questions about it. If I need budget to execute, just give me the budget, let me go and do my job. Without necessarily needing to quantify or justify the need for that budget, right?
I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
You don't hear that conversation on LinkedIn, but I do think by and large, this is how most marketing teams function.
Which is the reason for this podcast. So one of the things I definitely want to ask you, because you mentioned something, and I find the same thing to be true for me, especially in that startup environment where you had that close relationship with the CEO. So I guess you understood a lot in terms of how that person thinks about the business, what are the challenges they have in the business, not necessarily from a marketing standpoint, but just overall. And as the senior vice president at Narrative Science, I'm also assuming that you have that same, closeness with the CEO, the CFO, probably even the board members, if Narrative Science has a board, that is. What are some of the conversations that they usually have around marketing in terms of that watering hole? Just to give marketers some insights that may be disconnected from their CEO or CFO.
Yeah, obviously, so I'm part of the leadership team in the company. Obviously, I'm in the board meetings when they happen, presenting. So first and foremost, the majority of our conversation in those discussions when we meet weekly or we get together quarterly, it's all about the business and the strategy and performance. And so to have a seat at that table, you need to have a perspective on what you need to be doing as a company across not just your function, but all the functions, because that's really kind of what you're doing as what we call a first team. Meaning the first team is the leadership team. Right. Obviously, you got the head of product, you have the president, you have the CEO, you have the CFO. But really what we're doing in that first team is trying to figure out what is the direction and strategy and the priorities across the company that we're going to set forth. Out of that then comes what is the responsibility of the marketing team and the marketing strategy to facilitate and drive the business priorities. And so this seems pretty fundamental, but this is what I often see marketers kind of get lost on. And that is, there is a clear business strategy and direction and set of priorities. Your marketing strategy, and then obviously your tactics and execution, need to be able to be in support of helping deliver on those business objectives. It's pretty simple at kind of that level. From there, the conversations end up being let's talk about what that strategy is. Why do we pick certain directions? What were the outcomes versus the expectations? What do we need to change? What do we need to continue doing more of? Where would we like to get to with more investment? What you see in those conversations, though, is it's less about you're the marketer and you're the GM for the marketing function. It's very similar to a conversation you have with the head of product. The head of product is, this is what we're building. This is what features came out. Did the customers love them or not? Did it take us too long to build them? Here's what we want to build next because of this demand. Here's the investment we would need. It's the same conversation. It's just from a product perspective versus a market perspective versus, what you would do as a sales leader in terms of performance of the sales team and capacity and where you need to hire next. And so it's less about brand and tactics and demand gen. It's more about you're the GM of your business or of your function. Your function just happens to be marketing. And your goal is to create demand for your company. That's, in a nutshell, that's the role of marketing since marketing started, 100 years ago. Create demand for your products or services. That's the goal of marketing. It's simple as that. And so the question then is how are you going to do that?
That was going to be my next question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the fun part and the fascinating part about marketing is it really depends on the situation and where your company is and kind of their journey, what resources you have at hand. I mean, there's no sense putting together a marketing strategy for a company if it's going to cost you way more money than you have, and you're going to require a team that you don't have today.
Right.
So you got to obviously look at the constraints. You got to look at where you need to go. You got to look at the position and state of where you are and kind of the evolution of the organization. And so I know that's kind of a cop out, but like there isn't one playbook for a marketer to come in and run a team. You really got to assess the situation, figure out what the goals and objectives are, what you have to work with, and put that strategy together. That's what's fascinating about the role. And that's what you have to do in pretty much any leadership position in a company, not just marketing.
Yeah. And you said something I definitely want to touch on that, where you mentioned that marketers should think of themselves as GMs within, the business itself, helping to sustain the business, grow the business, rather than just a singular marketing function. And I saw a post you made where someone asked you, how do you develop business acumen? And one of the things I find, and I think they're both related, is there's a direct relation between developing business acumen and having a business mindset towards how you execute marketing. One of the things you said, which I agree with, is that most marketers think they have developed that business acumen, business mindset, but really and truly, when you have those conversations, you realize that they really haven't. So my question is, how can they develop that business mindset, business acumen, basically how to develop that GM mindset then, where you're looking at the entire business operation, not just your not small, but your function that's siloed within the organization.
Yeah, I can't remember what I posted about that, but it goes along the lines of first and foremost, I think you just have to be a curious person, and you have to genuinely want to know. I mean, you've invested in a company, you decide to work for this organization. You should want to understand how does it operate? How do you make money? How does the product work? Why do the customers buy your product? How do we build the products if that's important and relevant? And so on and on. Who are the competition? Why are they the competition? How do you fare versus the competition? So there's many frameworks you could use to kind of do that. But like, first and foremost, you just kind of got to understand like the situation and the landscape that you're in and why does this company exist? And how does this company make money? Yeah. And who are the people that are willing to give up money for whatever your company is producing? And so we oftentimes want to run into our function and just do our thing in our silo. And maybe in some other functions that works. But as a marketer, you need to understand like a broader picture in order to be very successful at doing the specific thing you're going to do, no matter if you're junior in marketing, senior in marketing, et cetera. I mean, in the title, marketing is the term market. And so you need to kind of understand that. You got to understand what you're building and supplying to that market. You got to understand the value of what your product or service is to the market, which is, how do you make money? And then how's that turn into like the investments you're going to make as a company? And so I don't expect the new marketer that's right out of undergraduate to be able to understand all that. But what I expect them to be able to understand is that they should know that over a period of time.
Right.
And so upon me, how do I do that? Well, as a leader in any new situation I come into, the first thing I'm going to figure out is all those things for myself. And then I'm going to make sure I can help teach my team and help them understand it for themselves so they can be better at what they do. So it's upon me as a leader to educate and train my team to be able to think like that and understand the aspects of the business. And why is it upon me? It's because I'm the leader and I've been doing this for a long time. I'm old, so I've seen many things, and it's easy for me to kind of figure these things out. And so because it's that, then my goal to my team, who tend to be more junior than me, is to help them understand that as well and bring them along that journey.
Yeah. Definitely I agree. And one of the things in terms of how to develop that business mindset, that curiosity, I found, which unfortunately a lot of marketers don't really do, which, one of the reasons why I wanted, or should I say the main reason why I wanted to bring you on, is surrounding data. Whether it is that they don't have access to that data, they haven't put the systems in place to collect, measure, and track that data. And I know there's this whole conversation around, not everything in marketing can be tracked, which I can probably say at least 95% of what we do in marketing can be tracked. I mean, probably 10, 20 years ago, that argument would have been valid, but with all the technology that we have available today, I personally don't believe that. But how do you suppose you can actually use data, or should I say how marketers can use data to prove their value in terms of how is marketing actually contributing to revenue growth and overall business growth? Like, how can they use data to be able to do that? Where, I mean, just like yourself, I'm sure you report on, metrics data when you're in those board meetings. In terms of what are some of the data points marketers can use within those board meetings to make that business case that marketing is actually contributing to the growth of the company?
Yeah. So for me, I think data is the great equalizer for marketing. Meaning, if you're having trouble being taken seriously in your company, then you should embrace data as a way to change that narrative. Right. Because that's, from what I've experienced, the only way you're going to change the narrative with senior leadership in a company if they're skeptical, is you got to show them the evidence. And so the idea that marketers try to cop out on, like, not everything can be measured and maybe we shouldn't measure everything, and I think is sending the wrong message to marketing teams. That's going to take them further away from their objective. And most of the objective of marketing teams is to be taken seriously.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to do multi-touch attribution and all the details. And I think marketers get caught up in the literal sense of what it means to be data-driven versus the reality of the situation. So we can get into that. Here's how we changed it at the company when I joined. So I came in, we had a great marketing team, but there were a few people junior. They kind of would do a lot of things that were asked of them. They didn't have a leader. And so the first thing I said when I came in, I kind of assessed the situation. I looked what we needed to do as a company, where we were. And, we picked the North Star metric, and we said at that time, like, we're going to be responsible for pipeline creation. And at that time, you typically have your sales team looking at booking deals. You had marketing kind of maybe looking at leads or website traffic. I said, really, what we need to do as a leading indicator to sales is create pipeline. And so that's what we needed to kind of make our North Star metric. And, the marketing team was, what do you mean? Like, they had a bunch of questions about that. But, that's what we told. That's what I told the LT or our leadership team. So I told the board. That's what we told the company in our all hands. And that's kind of how we set out. And then from there, like, obviously we got more sophisticated. So we walk into a board meeting and we talk about pipeline creation and where did it come from and conversion rates and how that translates to revenue. And before long, what happens is I'm talking about all go-to-market metrics in a board meeting because that's the handle that we had on it from a marketing organization. So that wasn't something that happened from day one, but that's what happened over time. We were able to quantify what was going on in the business what then were the things that we need to do more and less of? Where do we have gaps or bottlenecks that we need to address across the entire commercial organization? And once we're able to start doing that, like there wasn't a question of like whether marketing was important or not, because it wasn't a conversation about tactics and so forth and so on. It was a question about running the business. And so that's how we changed the dialogue. And you don't change that dialogue if you're not data driven.
Yeah, that's true. And speak a bit about, because you made a very important point in terms of one, first of all, having that North Star that either directly or indirectly is tied to revenue in some way. But I want marketers to really understand in terms of how they can really prove their value. So probably you can speak on when you first got started. What was the environment like, the culture like, in terms of marketing's value within the organization before you had that conversation with leadership versus after you had that conversation with leadership moving forward?
Before, so the marketing team was, there's been a lot of changeover. The previous leader was asked to leave. So when I took over, the team was junior, but well respected and great at kind of executing what was asked. So it's kind of your typical small organization where the CEO or the president would be like, hey, we should do this thing. Let's grab these folks in marketing and have them go do it. And then they would do it really well. But they weren't setting, they didn't have a seat at the table. They weren't setting the direction. They weren't coming up with a strategy. They were just good at executing what was asked. And so when you look at that, I'm like, this team has a lot of potential. They just need to kind of be put into a certain direction and let them go. Right. And then over time, have them develop their own strategy. And so that's what we focused on early on. And to do that, I had to make the target, the thing that we're striving for, relevant to the entire organization. And once we did that, and once I challenged the team saying, I'm not going to tell you exactly how we need to get there all the time, but here's where we need to get to. Let's go figure it out. You just saw an amazing group of people who had a lot of talent, but maybe not the opportunity to take advantage of it. And today they've turned into, like, my team will all be marketing leaders at some point in the future because of the talent and kind of the opportunity they've had here to kind of develop. And so all I needed to do is kind of point them in the right direction, give them the training and kind of the encouragement that they need, and they took care of the rest.
Yeah. And let's say, you came in, you were able to make that culture shift to where the marketing team was more data-driven, focused in terms of that's how you guys made decisions moving forward. Let's say there's someone who actually, they're in a company where using data to drive business decisions or even marketing decisions isn't a part of their culture. What process would you recommend that they can go through or take certain steps to help the organization become more of a culture of, being data driven? Yeah.
So I think this is actually not that. I think every company would, once you've kind of shown them how to be more data driven, I think most companies are like, yes, this is great. I love it. I want more of this.
Yeah.
So then it comes, where do you start? I think there's a few places you can start. One is you can start like what we did. I said, listen, there's a point in kind of the journey of how we make money that nobody's taken ownership for, and we're going to take ownership for it. And then we're going to figure out everything else from there. So if you take pipeline, once you're focused on that, what are the things that you're looking for? Well, how do I create it? So what are all the things I'm doing upstream to create pipeline? And then what happens when I create pipeline? Am I getting revenue out of it? So what's happening downstream? We picked that point as a starting point, and then we looked at kind of lagging indicators, leading indicators, and we got smarter over time, and we found more data, and we asked more questions. And what we're trying to do in that journey is figure out how do we create success, starting with pipeline and branching out from there, and looking at other metrics and tactics and so forth and so on. It could be you decide to start with like, hey, we're a marketing organization. We're creating tons of leads today. And that's all I'm doing in my own little world. Raise your head up a little bit and say, listen, well, what happens after you created the lead? How efficient is the process? Do those leads convert to pipeline? Do they convert to revenue? What are you doing to get the leads? Is it cost effective or not? It's the same structure for pretty much any business at a macro level. You just need to ask yourself, are the things that I'm doing today having an impact downstream? And if so, why? And if not, what can I do about it to change that as an organization? And then the thing that I'm measuring, if I want more of it, what are the things I need to do to get it? Right. And how efficient I am there. So maybe this is where the supply chain background comes in. But for me, I look at it kind of like it's a continuum here of, transformation that happens from I'm in the market, I get somebody interested all the way to them buying. What's that journey look like? How do you map it? Where do you want to start? And then over time, like you don't have all that data on day one. Where are the bottlenecks? How do I get the data? How do I improve at each step? It's a really arduous process. There's no magic bullet, but that's kind of the journey you kind of go through for any organization to become more data driven. What I found is as you start sharing these insights with other leaders, they may ask you a lot of questions. And this is where teams get kind of caught up. Like, oh, well, they don't believe me. It's not that they don't believe you. They're just making sure you've done the analysis correctly. But what I find on the other side is leadership loves this. Like they all want to be more data driven. They want to know with more certainty the direction their business is going and kind of how to change that direction. And the only way you really do that is by looking at the information or the data. Yeah. I know it's a long answer. Sorry about that.
It's a great answer. No, because this is the type of conversations I want to have, because one of the things I've realized, and I think you kind of answered the question as to why, is a lot of marketers tend to focus on top of funnel brand awareness, branding type activities. Some may venture into middle, where we're talking about the consideration phase, driving leads and so on. But you really hardly ever find a marketer that focuses on the entire funnel, which is what you just described. Like, if our metric is pipeline, then what needs to happen further up the funnel to drive that entire pipeline? And even probably in some cases, what do we need to do to help sales, convert that pipeline to actual won deals through, whether sales enablement or whatever other strategy you have. So, I find it to be very true, but you also said something that it's a very arduous process, which kind of made me go, well, yeah, it is. Probably that's why most marketers don't do it, because it takes a lot of work, but it's the type of work where if you really want to prove that what you're doing is actually of value, then as you said, you need that data. Leadership wants to see that data. And I was having a conversation with a CFO sometime this week where that person mentioned that based on their experience, and I kind of agreed, that marketers don't necessarily, I'm not saying this is all marketers, but some marketers don't like to be held accountable to a specific metric, because then if you aren't able to deliver on that metric, it makes them look bad, and then, there's a potential of them getting fired. I'm not even sure if there's a question there, but how would they even overcome that? Because we're living in a world right now, and I'm sure you see that at Narrative Science, where it's very data driven. How can they overcome that fear or that, apprehension to being accountable to a specific metric that's measurable, rather than saying, well, most marketing, you can't attribute it. So, we can't measure it. It's just the way how it is. It will deliver a result eventually. Yeah.
I mean, when I hear this dialogue or narrative, it drives me nuts. Like, you have to be able to, that's why you work. That's why you have a job. You're accountable for something. You need to be able to measure that. Now, you don't need to always be able to take that measurement and attribute it directly to revenue. which is, I think, the flaw marketers get into. But I'll give an example. We have a person on our team who started recently out of undergrad, and does our content. She's helping me with our podcast and so forth and so on. The conversation I'm having with her is not like, oh, the things you're doing need to be attributable to revenue. It's more of like the things that you're doing. What is the goal? What's the near-term goal? What are you trying to accomplish? When will we know that you were successful? It could be how many people listen to the podcast. It could be how many people read engage with content. It could be a lot of things. Now, what I'm trying to do is set this person up for success so they understand what they're accountable for, how we're going to measure that accountability, so they can understand if they're making progress or not. Now, of course, her manager and myself need to understand about how is what she's doing fit into the overall picture.
Right.
She doesn't need to know that necessarily. She doesn't need to know, like, I have some revenue target that it's 4 steps away from me, and that's why I'm developing content. She can understand how that works, but like, that's asking too much. But what we want to know is, are you, in this case, developing great content, and what is the impact? And how would we measure that? And that's what we work through with her. So like, there's no excuse to be, you're developing content, but you have no measure of success.
Right.
That's asinine. Like, not only for a company, but for that individual. How do they know they're doing a good job? And so you could take that and you can, at my level, of course it's going to be tied to like business value. Why wouldn't it be? Like, if you're on the leadership team, you need to be showing that what your team is doing is improving the top line and the bottom line of the company. Otherwise, you shouldn't be on the leadership team.
Yeah.
But for those on my team, like, I need to be able to articulate how what they do rolls up into that indirectly, not directly. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Is it the case where you're only responsible for the marketing team? Because I don't want to assume just because your title is SVP of Marketing and Sales. Are you also responsible for the sales team as well?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
So
today,
I started with pipeline, and I was always working closely with the sales team, because what we were doing more from a metrics and operations perspective is understanding how pipeline converted to bookings or not converted. So we were looking at stage transitions and conversion rates and getting into a lot of detail. That was all driven by myself and my team. So we started our relationship with sales very much data driven, and then helping them be more successful. And over time that evolved into, why don't you take over the sales team and run it as well? I think the important point of that is, like, I didn't run sales from the beginning, but because I understood how the entire commercial organization worked end to end, where we needed to improve and the metrics that govern it, it gave leadership a lot more confidence to say, well, why doesn't this guy just run the sales team as well? If I wasn't doing that from a metrics perspective, there'd be no way I'd be running the sales team today.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it, but I'd love if you give a more detailed response if possible. How to really achieve marketing and sales alignment? Because one of the things I've found with that is the reason why it's so difficult is really a difference of opinion and a difference of mindset. Marketing has one way how they think about their value to the organization. Sales has another way. So they both need to align and work together and collaborate to have the best, in terms of drive the best experience, both for the customer and, business value, as you mentioned. So how do you approach that whole conversation of marketing and sales alignment, even though you just, kind of fell into it, but just thinking back now, like how would you approach that, or how did you approach that alignment?
When I think about marketing and sales alignment, what I try to do is the importance of sales is, obviously they're the end result. Like, they're the ones closing deals. So what I've tried to stress with sales and marketing in the relationship is, we need to understand what they need to be successful. And then we need to work our way backwards. And so this would start with, a planning exercise that looks at like, what are our targets and goals, looking out next year back to, what do we need to do every quarter, back to like, what's the lead time and cycle time for the sales cycle, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I would do is I would, first of all, make sure we're all on the same page of what needs to happen for us to be successful. What do we need to do from a number of deals we need to win and revenue perspective, back to how much pipeline do we need to be creating by when, back to how many leads we need to generate and by when. I started that exercise when I was just running marketing and not sales, because it's important for marketing. If we don't know what we're trying, we have a high level goal as a company that gets broken down for the sales team to deliver on. And then marketing is the one creating the demand for that. And so we just needed to know that. Like, there's no way you can run an effective marketing organization if you don't know how that breaks down.
Right.
And so then, to your point, along the way, everybody's has the same point of view as far as what needs to happen. And then from there, what we're doing with sales is managing how do we help them deliver on that, and where are we off or on track to plan. So that could be marketing's not doing what they need to do, sales isn't following up on leads, but it's all in the same construct of like, what are the goals and targets through the entire kind of pipeline at a macro level. We need to book this much revenue. We need to generate this much pipeline. We need these types of leads. Things need to convert through the cycle at this rate. We're launching new products, so we need to make sure sales is educated. They can explain properly what's happening to prospects and customers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So once we put a structure around this from a metric perspective and a goals and perspective, the conversation was not that hard to have. That doesn't mean we didn't agree. That doesn't mean we agreed all the time on priorities and who is doing what. But we could look at the priorities and say, do we think it's going to move the needle on what we need to accomplish together as an organization? And when we did that, the relationship was, much, much better. We're going in the same direction with the same set of goals and the same set of assumptions and expectations on how we get there. And then we manage the execution to that together.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that you aligned our own goals and metrics. Definitely a great point. So the next question I definitely want to ask you, and we can close out with this, is, let's say marketers, because one of the biggest, I would probably say the biggest challenge of marketers is how to get that increase in budget that they really need to execute the type of marketing campaigns, initiatives that they really want to. As someone that sits at such a high level in terms of that hierarchical structure, how would you recommend marketers make the business case in terms of what should they be doing, what should they be focusing on, how do they communicate that business value, make that business case in a way where, the C-suite understands and say, yes, we think that's a worthwhile investment. We'll give you the money that you need to make that happen.
So if you've executed everything we've talked about up to this point, and you know how you turn what marketing does into revenue for the company end to end, the conversation then becomes fairly straightforward in terms of budget, because most companies are trying to increase their revenue or their bookings, which means you tend to need more resources, even though you're hoping to get more efficient. You've learned that over time because you have the data to prove it. The budget then becomes like, okay, well, here's what we want to do next. How are we going to get there? Marketers now have the confidence to be able to say, well, because I understand how everything works, these are the types of things we're going to need to do. This is the type of investment we're going to need to make. We think the return on that investment is going to be us being able to hit the goals, and that's economical or not. And so that doesn't mean it's an easy conversation, but you have a lot more confidence in being able to articulate what you need, or the reverse. Leadership is asking you to do something that's irrational with no money. You're able to come back and say that the economics of that don't work. If you're not data driven, you don't understand that end to end, you're not going to have much of a, that's where the CFO is going to call bullshit on you and say like, listen, there's no substance to what you're asking for. And I think a lot of times like marketers they don't need more money. They just need better execution of what they spend. How do you get better execution? You know what you're doing and whether it works or not through the entire kind of commercial, pipeline or value chain, however you want to think about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy. I mean, at the end of the day, it really starts with or should I say, we can end with how you started, where you mentioned data is really how marketers level the playing field within the organization. That's really all it boils down to throughout this entire conversation.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what I appreciate about this conversation is when I hear about data and I read about what marketers say about data, and we'll pick on LinkedIn. For whatever reason, it all comes back to attribution. We didn't talk about attribution once in this discussion, but we talked about the importance of understanding data and the impact on your business.
Yeah.
And that's how marketers should think about it. It's not about some point of attribution. It's about understanding the bigger picture. And once you understand that, you're going to have way more influence. You'll probably get way more budget. And you'll feel like you're making a bigger difference in your organization than you likely are today.
Yeah, awesome. And with that said, I think that's a good note to close on. I was going to ask if you have any closing thoughts, but I think that's a great way to close this conversation, Cassidy. So if people need to reach you, where can they find you?
You can find me at LinkedIn. I'm usually on that every day, so feel free to reach out, and if you see something I post that you like or don't like, feel free to comment on it. Winston does, whether he likes it or not.
Definitely. All right, Cassidy, thanks so much. Definitely appreciated you taking time out to be on. Definitely, you dropped some nuggets here that I'm grateful for.
Yeah, I'm happy to be on. Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to do it anytime.
This has been the Revenue Alignment Podcast. Join us next week where we have more amazing content to help you demonstrate, communicate, and prove your value at the C-suite level. I'm Winston, your host, and this is a wrap.